Super Rugby power rankings for round one of Super Rugby. The round one power rankings is always an interesting one because you've got very limited data as to how to order the teams. If you haven't seen one of my power rankings videos before, it's essentially a way to track where the teams are at in terms of their current form, rather than just where they are on the log. Like you might look at a team like the Rebels last year who came out of the blocks absolutely firing and then kind of fell to bits throughout the end of the year. So whilst as they start losing games, they might still retain a pretty high spot on the table. In actual fact, they're in pretty poor form and should be on a rankings terms like dropping down. So yeah, I do this essentially based on a formula. I always tweak it. It's not that complicated. It's just based on wins and losses, which is kind of what the table's based on. And then what were the margins and home and away, that kind of thing. And the one bit which is kind of opinion-based is the strength of the team. So that's all down to me to decide, did a weak team beat a strong team, or was it two kind of middle-of-the-road teams playing each other? So it's a bit of maths and a bit of opinion-based stuff. But yeah, I've put together the round one power rankings. As I said, because it's the first round, they're probably going to jumble around a wee bit for the first couple of weeks, and then hopefully we should start to see less kind of sudden spikes and sudden drops. 15th spot was home to the Sunwolves almost all of last year, but for the first round of Super Rugby, it's home to the Hurricanes. Now, that seems a bit harsh because they were away in South Africa, so that's going to be a hard game to start the season with anyway, but they didn't even score a point. And the Stormers are a team that weren't exactly setting the world alight last year. I know they retained a fair bit of their talent, whereas the Hurricanes lost some, but 27-0 away to the Stormers was a pretty poor start to the season. They have the Jaguares up next in Argentina, so it doesn't get any easier for them. But yeah, 27-0. Apart from not conceding more points, is about as bad as a start as it gets. You could make a case for these guys also being the bottom of the log because, as I said, the Sunwolves are traditionally the weakest team in Super Rugby, and these guys lost to the Sunwolves in that first round. Did the Rebels 36 points to 27. Definitely a game they should have been winning on paper, and they could not get it done. The Sunwolves very deserved winners in the end for that one. So yeah, Rebels are down there in 14th, away to the Brumbies next, so it actually gets a wee bit trickier for them as well. They will need to turn things around pretty quickly after that disappointing performance. Also pretty disappointing was the Lions, and again, it seems pretty harsh because these three teams all played away. The Lions had to go over there to Argentina to play the Jaguares, last season's finalist, but 38 points to 8. That's a 30-point walloping in the end. So the loss of players. Well, I see they signed Jaco Kriel, so that's good that he's back if he can stay fit, because apparently since he left, he's only played like 16 games for Gloucester. So hopefully being back in familiar territory will do him some good. But yeah, 38 points to 8 is a bit of a hiding for the Lions. And rounding out the bottom row, the Blues. I swear they almost never get out of the bottom row. It's pretty frustrating. So they were at home. They lost. You expect to win your home games. A lot of hype about how the Blues were going to do this year. They led at halftime. They crumbled in the second half. The Chiefs really came good. 37 points to 29. Didn't even get a losing bonus point for the Blues. So steady as she goes. Pretty similar to last year, if you are a Blues fan. Familiar territory indeed. So that's the bottom row. Next, we get into some of the teams whose losses were either a bit closer or a bit more expected. So the Bulls. The Bulls lost away to the Sharks. 23 points to 15. It definitely wasn't a impossible mission, and they were competitive in the game, but in the end, especially when the Sharks scored that last try, it took the game away from them and took them beyond kind of a close game to comfortable in the end win for a Shark. So it's not disaster. These teams' first games were kind of around that disastrous start territory. Really bad home loss, got a hiding, lost to the Sunwolves, and 27 points to nil. Couldn't score a point. So, the Bulls look semi-competitive. Well, more than that. Competitive, but they'll have to pick things up. And they've got an away trip to the Stormers, so it doesn't get any easier for the teams who lost first up. Now, these guys had about the hardest start to the season you could have. They played the Crusaders away from home, did the Waratahs. It was in Nelson, so it's not their traditional home, but it's still a home game for the Crusaders. And they got rightly beaten. 43 points to 25, so it could have been more. It could have been less. That's insightful. The Waratahs looked at one point like they were going to get absolutely walloped. They still did get beaten pretty comfortably, but they went away and scored 25 points. At phases of that game, they looked all right, and then at other times, the Crusaders just looked too good. So I think the reason these guys are maybe a bit higher than some of these other teams is the fact that you go away to the Crusaders, no one's blaming you for losing. It's to be expected. The fact that you managed to score 25 points, credit to you for that one. So 10th spot for the Waratahs. And rounding out the teams that lost, it's the Reds in 9th spot. They had a legit close game with the Brumbies, 27 points to 24. It was away from home. So, that was never going to be an easy one for them either. It was a bit too tough for them in the end. But again, the fact that they could have won the game right up until the last minute kind of speaks to where they're at, especially seeing as the Brumbies were, one of the playoff teams last year. So the Reds finished 14th. Maybe that's improvement. We will see. So that kind of rounds out the bottom half. You got these guys here at 8 because they didn't play yet. They were on the bye. They start off their campaign with a home game against the Sharks. So that will be an interesting one as well to see if the Highlanders got any rust. But that's the bottom half. And then there's the top teams. Still haven't got to the Sunwolves yet, which is almost unheard of. 7th spot, kind of no surprise. It mirrors the red spot as the Brumbies' narrow victory over a team last year which finished 14th. You could say the Brumbies should do better, but it's a new season, so we'll have to give it a round or two before we see where the relative strength of these teams is at. But either way, it wasn't exactly convincing from the Brumbies. They did enough, but not a lot more. The Sunwolves are in 6th. Unbelievable. It was a home win. It was pretty comfortable in the end. They couldn't have lost it at the end. New team. Almost the whole side is a bunch of new players. By all accounts, they should have been comfortably beaten. One warm-up game. A month's preparation. I know it was only the Rebels, and I'd say that with all due respect. The Rebels haven't made the playoffs ever. But they were supposed to get beaten, and they didn't. So it's not quite as impressive if they'd beaten several of the other teams who, playoff teams from last year. But still, absolute credit to the Sunwolves. They are in the second row on my board for, I believe, the first time ever. Generally, I think they've only made it out of this bottom row once or twice. So credit to them. Next, by the way, the Sunwolves have the bye next week, so we'll see how they manage that one. Next is the Sharks. Again, it's probably kind of almost slightly mirroring the Bulls spot on the board because it was a competitive game. They didn't blow the Bulls off the park. The Bulls were a decent team last year, but we're still not quite sure where they're at. We're still not sure where the Sharks are at. The Sharks have got a good enough squad to make the knockouts for sure. So, good pass mark for them and reflected in their position on the board. Next. Now, this is one that I think in reality should be higher, but based on the result, I'm going to put it here. The Crusaders. The Crusaders should be here, realistically. But I've only got that one set of data to go from. They beat the Waratahs by, 43-25. So not quite 20 points. You might have thought Crusaders at home over a team which, again, didn't do all that well last year and has had a bit of a big reform with a new coach and losing like a guy debuting at number 10. You thought the Crusaders may have put them even more to the sword, and I will update the logo, speaking of swords, at some point. I keep saying that eventually I'll do it. But, yeah. Based on that result, I put the Crusaders marginally behind these teams. Expect them to go here very soon. It's not me throwing shade at the Crusaders, it's just the way the numbers kind of crunched out. As I said, it's only one round, so not perfect. Next, Chiefs. It's a hard one because they beat the Blues, and the Blues are a bad team. We know that. Past seasons tell us that. They beat the Blues. Part of me is probably looking at the fact that the Blues were like ranked 5th in terms of the bookies' odds to be the champions of Super Rugby, which right now seems like a big old joke. But yeah, they beat the Blues away from home. So like in comparing that to the Crusaders game, Crusaders were at home, Chiefs were away. On paper, apparently the Blues are a better team than the Waratahs. So that's why the Chiefs are essentially above the Chiefs are above the Crusaders. So I know the Crusaders had the margin, but I've put some other factors there. It's a pretty slight difference, but that's where the Chiefs are at. And to make it more interesting, the Crusaders are playing the Chiefs next week in Hamilton. So that will decide that one. Be very interesting. Next, second spot, we'll give it to the Jaguares. As I said, 38 points there over the Lions. They've kind of been traditional rivals recently, like the Lions knocked them out of the quarterfinals. The first time the Jaguares made it, the Jaguares record over in Joburg is poor. The Lions sending a team to Buenos Aires doesn't usually end up that well, and sure enough, 38 points to 8. Very comfortable win from the Jaguares. They were missing a few key guys based on, the guys they've lost as well. Matera, who was probably their key man last year, no longer with them. So their key man again, and Bonisia went off like within the first few minutes, and yet they still managed to win that comfortably. So Jaguares in second, which leaves only, and it's a mirror of the bottom team, it's the Stormers. Now I understand Mbonambi and Kolisi have injured themselves and are out for quite extended periods, which is, it's just like the Stormers, man. Their players always get injured. So it's going to be tough for them to keep on to that number 1 spot, but a good result for the Stormers. They can be very happy with shutting out the Hurricanes, getting a big win, 27 points to 0. Very emphatic. So, yes, that is the power rankings for round number 1. As I said, it's just one set of data, so come next week, could be a massive shift in positioning, and then by 3rd, 4th, 5th week, it should start to kind of steady out. Teams on the bye may move up or down. Like the Sunwolves, in all likelihood, will go down after their bye, but then everyone else is going to have the bye as well, so it kind of works the same as it does on the table. But yeah, it's slightly different from how things look on the actual log, but that's my interpretation of it for round 1. I've been tweaking the power rankings formula for a couple of years now, so we'll see if the current tweaks make any difference. It tends to start off pretty nice, and then I have to go and make manual adjustments as the season goes on, so we'll see if the tweaks this year have done the trick. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts, and I will talk to you again soon. See you later.